Well, good evening. And a lot of people have been asking me, what's all the bullying about? A lot of people ask, what's really going on? Well, tonight on Brother Mark Turner Syndrome, Butterflies in Life, I'm going to go ahead and go over, and I've had some requests to go over this, to go over the dynamics of mind control. Now, are all TS groups cults? No, of course not. There are a lot, but there is are all TS organizations cults? No, of course not. They're very wonderful, upright organizations that provide advocacy, that provide support, and then support for butterflies, processing, whether it's going from being a caterpillar to a butterfly, from being a girl to be a woman, to looking at their talents, to looking at the things that are preventing them to be that all they can be. No, there's some wonderful organizations. I support one. And with great love and great compassion and enthusiasm. What we're seeing, though, is we're seeing a abusive group, though, that has its tentacles throughout the Turner Syndrome community. And that itself can be psychologically destructive. I mean, obviously, a lot of women and a lot of friends are suffering anger, anxiety, confusion. There have been cases where people tried to speak up and have been squelched, and they're wondering, what's going on. Well, I've been in this type of environment myself. I've been in the first of in my resume, I was in a cult-like group, the movement known as the Shepherd Discipleship Movement from 1980 to 84. When I realized the mind control dynamic and how my life was being controlled and what I was doing in the name of the group, I got out. Also among my, and I've been involved in the anti-cult movement from 1984 to about the mid-90s. From about the late 90s till about mid-90s to about 2007, I really strongly advocate what's called spiritual abuse. And spiritual abuse is where scripture or prayer or pastoral authority can be used to control the environment to an I versus them mentality. So there only comes a point that the only reality is the group itself. And there's a lot of psychological damage. There's a lot of distrust. There's a lot of suicide because of it. Anger, feelings of being violated and betrayed. And I think I'm seeing the same dynamics that are happening in a segment of the Turner Syndrome community. But it's a segment that's where a lot of people have lost their ability to think for themselves and their own personal autonomy. And those who are on the outside are seeing relationships get broken. They're seeing anger. They're experiencing narcissistic abuse, nightmares. And there's also that dynamic that the only reality is the group itself. So if you try to confront the reality, they'll turn it back on you. So tonight, I'm going to go ahead and go back and look at a paper written by the late Paul Martin. Paul Martin was a former elder in a heavy shepherding group, and as a result of what he did, he had a ministry, Christian ministry, and also a professional ministry to work with those who had been affected by what some people might say cults, abusive groups, high demand groups. I'm going to steer away from the term cult because it's such a loaded term. I mean, I really had to appreciate a sermon by a Unitarian minister back in 1985 called "Cult as a Four-Letter Word." It's such a charged term. But I do want to go over the dynamics of what's called mind control. And then another great resource to learn about it. And are you being affected by it? Do you have a loved one in the Turner Syndrome community who's being affected by it? Is to go to the International Cultic Studies Association. Another great organization, too. It's currently closed. I don't know if they're accepting clients, but they're still on Google. It's called Wellspring. But there's lots of organizations, though, that are dealing with people who have found themselves on the wrong side of abuse or the realization of what they've done is wrong, and they suddenly snap out, go, what am I doing? I violate my own conscience. I'm violating the law. It's like somebody took advantage of me. I didn't know what I was doing. That's a process known as snapping. And if you come into that where you realize, and I know we've had some sisters who have snapped out and realized, what am I doing? And they're feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of remorse. I want to tell you, you were taken advantage of. You didn't realize what you were doing. You're forgiven. Don't beat yourself up. And it's okay to tell your story. Now, the dynamics of mind control was generated by Robert J.A.Y. Lifton, Lifton, just like the T, from Yale University. So if you look up Lifton mind control in Google, you're going to find information for yourself. But I'll explain what they are, and then I'm also going to go ahead explain how they are playing out among what I'm going to call the TS bullying group. So the topics is the 8 parts of it is milieu or environmental control, mystical manipulation. I'm not too sure how that much has to play in here. The demand for purity, the only reality is the group itself. The cultic confession, forcing to confess things that are simply not there. Sacred science, that's where we try to validate the reality of the group. Loading to the point where the only reality is the group itself. It's like alcoholism. The only reality is the bottle. Or in gambling, the only reality is getting that thrill out of that next hit. And the two can be quite addictive. I should know I've been there. Again, I've got some 40 years experience in this, so I can see how this is playing out. Loading the language, using thought-stopping cliches. He's a stalker. He's a pedophile. He's a TS bully. He's a pathological liar. Those are charged terms, so that so when you try to approach somebody, they say, you're a stalker. And their minds will lock into that. And their critical abilities to really step back and look at it, they're so locked into it. Now, eventually the realities that the system's not quite working is oftentimes enough for most people to go, wait a minute. And generally, most people who come out of an abuse group, a handful come out through interventions. Some are kicked out of the community. And I think we got some people who have been kicked out of the bullying community are wondering what's happening. And so those people can get educated. But most people, when they're in an abusive group, will actually walk out of a group. So, because after a while, something's just not going to add up. And eventually, one's critical thinking is going to go, time out, hold it. Something ain't right here. But there is what's called doctrine over person and dispensing of existence. Dispensing of existence, though, can be very dangerous because there are elements that want to do away with anybody who's critical of the TS bullies, of the TS bullying group. And that's not making it safe for butterflies. It's not making it safe for TS parents. for spouses, significant others, for siblings. I mean, I'm already getting notes of people whose lives, whose families are being separated, by this. I know there are people who are afraid to speak up because of the abuse. Remember, if you see something, say something. Okay, this is going to be a long video. I want to tell you up front. So, I'm not sure if I'm going to break it up into 2 segments, do part 1 and part 2. We'll find out as we go along, or whether we're just going to have to do it in one long video, and then you may have to do it and just kind of watch it in segments. I usually don't like to do anything more than 30 minutes. So let's go back and let's look at Paul Martin's article and quoting from Milieu Control. And let's see. Milieu control is the control of communication within the group environment, resulting in a significant degree of isolation from the surrounding society. This includes other techniques to restrict members' contacts with the outside world. And through the beauty of social media and through blocking and restricting people who can be in or out, these groups can actually use social media to control the information. Robert J. Lifton says the most basic feature of thought reform environment, the psychological current which all else depends, is the control of human communication. In this case, it's the control through private Facebook groups and trying to control the information and to bias the information that anybody critical is to make it look like the enemy. That's one of the beauties of narcissistic abuse. So if I try to be critical and I try to state facts, back comes the language: I'm a pedophile, I'm a stalker, I'm psychotic, and those thought-stopping cliches. And then if you try to if you criticize somebody, they will attack, but they're not able to listen to reason because of the environmental control. So this includes not only communication with the outside, but also communication with themselves. Thought reform participants may be in doubt to who's telling what to whom, but the fact that extensive information about everyone is being conveyed to the authority is always known. So there's leaders at the top who definitely know what's going on. Yes, we definitely got a leader who has recruited people and has also influenced other components of the TS community to restrict communication. There are people who know there's something going on, but because of the restriction of information and people being in lockstep, that's creates the environmental control. The next one is called mythical manipulation. Now, generally what mythical manipulation is, there's some cathartic experience to validate the reality of the group. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to play out too well in the TS bullying group, but going back to Paul Martin and quoting his research from Robert J. Lifton of Yale University, I guess this to say, ideological totalists are impelled by a special kind of mystique that not only justifies manipulation, but makes them mandatory. There is almost a manic higher calling to criticize any of the critics who are wondering, what's going on here, or anybody who's outside of the goal. Now, endemic in the TS group is the only people in the TS group should be women. Now, this is different than just having a women's support group. I mean, of course, women should have a support group. I mean, there are women's issues, especially in the community, that are so sensitive. Of course, they need to be in there. But what we're talking about is the women will not allow any communication from men. That would mean counselors. That would mean husbands, brothers, siblings. Those are in the outside community, like myself, who want to be supported. That's kind of the key. Only women are supposed to be part of this TS bullying movement. So they are the agents chosen by history, by God, or some supernatural force to carry out the mystical imperative to destroy critics of their group, to destroy threats, even though they're perceived threats, not real threats, but threats nonetheless, in a pursuit which must supersede all consideration of decency or immediate human welfare. I've done it myself. I chased a girl and trying to recruit her. I was totally blind to what I was doing because the mind control dynamic in the Shepherd Discipleship movement. The group said, well, if you're hurting somebody, that's okay. You're doing God's will. And I didn't know. I was dealing with the information that I had at the time. And so once again, there's some higher cause that people can really start to rally around. Martin writes, and I'm just quoting his thing, highlights in bold, this requires that the member participate actively in the manipulation of others, as well as an endless round of betrayals and self-betrayals which are required. So the bullying, the spreading rumors, the attacks, the ad hominem attacks, and the profanity-laced middle of the night text messages are part of that higher calling. Whatever his response, the member has been deprived of the opportunity to exercise his, in most of the case, her capacity for self-expression and independent action. A lot of people don't realize they've been caught up in it. Some have, and some have realized, what am I doing? And some, you may have remembered, because they were caught up in the dynamic and were not making rational decisions, actually were given full pardons. Amy Jo Talark is a case in point. Yes, she said some very nasty ad hominem attacks, but I realized that wasn't something she said on her own. That was something that was influenced by the group. Because at first we had a very caring and supportive professional relationship, and I was very supportive of her page. Then the bullies came in and started spreading misinformation that Amy fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Now, a lot of people on the outside actually saw the night that Amy Jo Talark and I were interviewed by Catherine and Jeremy Sargefield. Now, that one pretty much is public record, and people were absolutely horrified that I wasn't allowed a chance to defend myself. That's the only reality of the group itself, and they had to force us out, and then finally, even the Sargefields fell under it too. So one is not allowed to think, and it's almost a danger that if I think, am I going to lose my salvation? Is hell going to swallow me up? Is something horrible going to happen to me? But when reader starts to think for themselves, and when the mind starts going and says, what am I doing? Then there's a really good sense of empowerment when one starts going, wait a minute, hold on. Demand for purity. Again, Martin, the world is viewed as black and white, and group members are constantly exhorted to strive for perfection. The only reality is the group itself. Don't try to reason with any of the TS bullies. They won't reason, because the only reality is, even though I'm a wonderful benefactor, the only reality is that anybody outside of the group are psychologically deranged, stalkers, pedophiles. You see all the thought-stopping cliches again? Lifton, Robert J. Lifton again. In thought reform milieu, as in all situations idealistic totalism, the experiential world is sharply divided between the pure and the impure, the absolutely good and the absolutely evil. The good and the pure, of course, are those ideas, feelings, and actions which are consistent of the TS bullying group. Anything else is apt to be relegated with the bad and the impure. The philosophical assumption underlying this demand of absolute purity is attainable. Again, the only reality is the group itself. Only women are to be part of the TS community. Well, again, it's unattainable. We have men for example, on the board of the Turner Syndrome Society, including Dean Mooney. We have neurologists who are fine gentlemen. We have academic researchers. Using that line of thing, we couldn't even have Henry Turner. We'd have to dispense Henry Turner as not even existing if we follow this fallacious logic. But that's part of it. Cult of confession. Serious and not so often sins are defined by the group and to be confessed either privately to a personal monitor or publicly with the group at large. In totalist hands, confession becomes a means of exploiting rather than offering solace for these vulnerabilities. The assumption underlying totalist exposure is the environment's claim to total ownership of each individual's self within it. The cult of confession makes it virtually impossible to attain a reasonable balance between worth and humility. Now, here there's kind of an implied, how it's called purity is playing out is in the spreading of rumors, in doing the videos. Here's another video coming on, and that's to expound the goals of the group. So the purpose of rumors is actually exploit and to make other vulnerable. And the MO, or the modus operandi, is through narcissistic abuse. We don't have a problem. You have a problem. You're in the wrong cosmos. You're deranged. You're English. You're German. You're an XYZ phobe. What they're trying to do is shift their frailties onto the victim or onto the critic of the group. And I see it time and time again, ad infinitum and then ad nauseum. Number 5, the sacred science. The doctrine of the group is considered to be the ultimate truth. Once again, the only reality is the group itself. Truth beyond all questioning or disputing. The leader of the group is likewise above criticism for the spokesperson of God on earth or the spokesperson. And I know that the leaders are certainly above criticism and can kind of really slither away unnoticed, and then they have their underlings do the abuse. If you notice that, if you're really careful, have you ever noticed that the people that started the abuse and who the claims begin have never come forward? That's part of sacred science. That's part of the game. They'll have the underlings do it so they can escape detection. Generally speaking, we have a TS mom trying to use TS organization to force through a strongly authoritarian and dogmatic message that only TS women can be part of the community. Anyone outside of the belief system is to be mocked, ridiculed, and threatened. Any other views considered to be something to be dispensed of. The TS cult pulse and videos spread rumors and consider themselves above all criticism and reasonable evaluation. And some of these people are real slick because they know how to just stay right on the radar and right under the law and escape detection. Loading the language. These are thought-stopping cliches. The group develops a jargon in many ways unique to itself, but understandable to outsiders. In the TS music group, again, the thought-stopping cliches. He's a sex offender. He's a pedophile. He's psychotic. He's doing this. He's doing that. The rumor spreading and being stuck in it is the loaded language. I mean, I know one person went back and looked at some of her videos and was just absolutely horrified. If you look carefully, you're going to see a real glassy look. I look at one video, and this person's out, but you can see that glassy look. He's a sex offender. He's a stalker. He's a pedophile. He goes after women and children. He's a stalker. He's a pedophile. You see that? It's that robotic look and that ritualization. I mean, I've seen that in some of the videos, and it's like, oh yeah, I know it, and it's just that robotic stare. I mean, that's, yes, mind control's real, and maybe some of you watching have seen it. Say, yeah, and maybe it gets somebody to think and go, you know, there was a video when Lucy, now I'm going to use my picture name, was like that. He said, yeah. Because people don't know they've been had. Robert J. Lifton says, the language of the totalist environment is characterized by thought-stopping cliche. The most far-reaching and complex human problems are compressed into brief, highly reductive, definitive sounding phrases, easily memorized and easily expressed. These begin the start and finish of any ideological analysis. Totalist language then is repetitively centered, all-encompassing jargon, prematurely abstract, highly categorical, and relentlessly judging. And anyone but most of the vote advocate deadly dull in Lionel's trilling phrase, the language of non-thought. Now, I deliberately read that quote from Lifton as if there were a Robert J. Lifton cult and I was one of his followers. That glassy-eyed look. I've been there. I again, you know, I know what it looks like. Doctrine over person. The personal experiences of the group are subordinated to the truth and held by the group. Apparently, contrary experiences must be denied or reinterpreted. The death threats, and by several members of the TS community, we're going to come after you. We're going to sue you. We're calling the police. We know where you live. This explains why TS bullies are unable to rationally assess critical pro and con information. The mind control dynamic in the TS bullies essentially implies that one would be out of the will of the group. There's that horrid, what's going to happen if I lose face? What happens if everything's wrong? Is hell going to come up and swallow me? What's going to happen? And that fear, I've been there. I know what it, like most people in high demand groups leave when the reality doesn't hit. You know, God gave us a brain. And I'll give you a good piece of advice. If your gut level instinct says that something's not wrong and something's not right, let me repeat that again. If your gut level instincts are telling you something is not right, go ahead, check it out, run with it. It could save your emotional and physical and spiritual life. The doctor is always more important than the individual. Lifton. The sterile language refers the characteristic feature of ideological totalism, the subordination of human experience in the claims of doctrines. When the myth becomes fused with the totalist sacred science, the reality, the loaded language, the resulting language can be so compelling and coercive that it simply replaces the realities. The only reality is the group itself. Consequently, past historical events are retrospectively altered, wholly rewritten, or ignored. Meaning people outside the group known that I'm a benefactor. They've known that I've worked with women. They've known that I've headed off a suicide attempt. They know that the women could come to me day or night. But this one cult leader has spread a message that I'm a threat to the organization. That everybody's running with it, and they're caught up in the rhetoric. The same doctrinal primacy prevails in the totalist approach to changing people demands that character and identity be reshaped, not in accordance with their special natures or potentiality, but rather to fit the rigid contrary of the doctrinal or group mold. The underlying assumption is that the doctrine, including its mythological elements, is ultimately more valid, true, and real than any aspect of human character or human experience. When stories are disproved, such as like liar, liar, butterfly, wings and fire, then the bullies come up with new stories or come up with new attacks or new rumors. The only reality. Now, the good news, though, is a lot of people are starting to think for themselves and do and advocate. Again, if something doesn't ring true, if there's just something that just doesn't sound right, go with your intuition. Start asking questions. When I got out, I hardly had any information on my group, and I had phone bills that were bigger than the U.S. debt. Today, though, with the internet, there's a lot of information on mind control, narcissistic abuse, as well as Turner syndrome. And the ultimate thing that this is the most dangerous, and this is why I think the Turner syndrome community as a whole has got to say, wait a minute. Dispensing of existence. The group arrogates itself to the prerogative to decide who has the right to exist and who does not. We're seeing that. The death threats. And there have been repeated death threats, and they're documented, and then they're recorded. And then when they were caught, then the people that were perpetrating all of a sudden set their videos to private, so as to escape detection. If they refuse to join the group, they must be rejected. They either are going to be forced in the group and forced into the dynamics. If they refuse to join the group, then they must be rejected by the group members, even their family members. In rare cases, this concept gives the group to terminate the outsider's life. TS butterflies, moms, dads, spouses. We're supposed to be against bullying. This is the ultimate form of bullying. And this is what's happening. Anybody critical of the TS bullying group. Again, there have been several de facto death threats to those critical. Law enforcement's been in on it. Legal counsel is in on it. It's conform or else is their message. But again, notice who are friends and who are not today. But who are now enemies. Lifton, the totalist environment draws a sharp line between who those who are right to exist can be recognized and those who possess no right. This can cause serious psychological harm to the TS community and to butterflies. My original admin who was critical of it was forced off the forum. Amy's channel was forced off by the bullies on several occasions. There are women around the world who've been attacked. Well, I want to tell you something. If something doesn't sound right to you, it probably isn't. Gut level instincts, use them. Start asking questions. Start asking facts and figures. By the way, if you have been affected, go on YouTube. Tell your story. and go on Facebook and tell your story. Because one, you're going to get out of your system. Two, you're going to educate other members of the Turner Syndrome community, and they're going to go, yeah, wait a minute, that happened to me. You too? Wait a minute, did you know? Yeah. And it's going to create greater awareness and advocacy against the bullying. Advocacy, education, and critical thinking. So if you've been affected, it's okay to come clean. And again, it's okay to report it. And maybe some of you can't because of the nature of your condition. I wouldn't force anybody. If you know you can't, you can't. Don't force yourself into a mold. That would be even worse. But if you can be that one person that gets on social media and says, yeah, it happened to me. That might get others to have the courage to speak up. So that way, we all in the Turner Syndrome community, butterflies and friends, can be Turner strong. So again, if you see something, say something.